Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yes, Unity Temple Choir. Look out. Look out. I can only imagine that Frank Lloyd Wright could only have dreamed of this day in 2017, the place looking fantastic, the choir singing their hearts out, the place filled with people, including politicians and preachers and folks from all walks of life together in this place, facing each other and facing a world that is filled with all kinds of problems and possibilities. The last time I stood in this pulpit was 14 years ago for the installation of Alan as the senior minister. I went back and read over what I said on that occasion just recently. I did the charge to the congregation, if you were here, and you might recall. You've done very well living up to that charge, I have to say. On that occasion, I suggested, we call it a charge, so I guess I strongly suggested that you do three things. You protect the freedom of this pulpit, which means that for as long as he's called as the senior minister of this church, this pulpit is Alan's pulpit. And your job, Unity Temple, is to make sure that he is free of all and any political, doctrinal, or personal constraints. It's a remarkable thing, ensuring a home for a free pulpit to exist. It's one of the most courageous acts of affirmation of belief in our democratic society. To provide a 3-foot square of space for the freest expression of doubt and faith, of conviction and yearning, of truth and opinion is something of enormous consequence. To house a pulpit upon which there are no limits placed upon the one who is called to it, no creedal test or examination, no burden of dogmas or doctrines, no articles of faith. Where else in the world? Where else anywhere? What sheer extravagance of the human spirit. By this rededication, this congregation reaffirms its reason for being. And one powerful reason is giving a home and a pulpit with the unique privileges and responsibilities of the freest voice wherewith to speak to the conscience of the culture. The freest voice wherewith to question openly and publicly the prevailing assumptions, the common morality, the existence of the popular gods. The freest voice wherewith to plumb the depths of our being, to search out the dearest, freshest, deep down things. Through the restoration of this church, one thing that you're doing is providing a free pulpit to a minister to cry out loud, to lift up his or her voice like a trumpet in controversy and compassion. Unity Temple, today is a day to renew and reaffirm this congregation's reason for being. It's a day to renew your calling. You've been called to offer a distinct witness. You are different from the people in the churches across the street and around the corner. You're different from the people who have no faith community. You're different from people who enter this beautiful building as tourists to admire its style and architecture. You are different. And you are called to maintain your differences even as you seek to foster unity with others. I applaud you. You have done a wonderful job at this. Alan has told me that he's been afforded this pulpit with absolute freedom. And I've heard a number of his sermons, and he's a really good preacher. And this church has grown stronger and more relevant because of it. He loves you. He loves you, and he has a huge heart for this community and the wider Chicago area and this world. Now, I also charged you that day to take care of Alan and his family, and I applaud you again because you've done a wonderful job of that. And my last charge was to say that you have a beautiful structure, and you must tend to it carefully. But I hope that you never confuse your spectacular structure with your spectacular purpose. Now you have an even more spectacular building, so it's time to renew and dedicate yourselves to an even more spectacular purpose. Are you with me? Unlike Reverend Bushkowski, I'm used to getting a lot of feedback when I preach in my church, so it's good to hear that you're out there. I want to share with you an excerpt from a sermon from the minister emeritus of my congregation, the Reverend Dr. John Wolfe, who some of you may have heard just died at the age of 92 last week. He said of our church, and it's true of this church as well, I believe this place exists because we created it. It's no accident. It never would have happened without us and those friends and those older companions who preceded us, who laid the foundation for what we have built and are rebuilding. Not just anybody would have done it. Not just anybody would have needed to do it. Not just anybody would have wanted to do it. For whatever reason, and we have many reasons, we bond together here to celebrate a faith for the free. He went on, the church is not just going to happen. It did not come out of nowhere, nor is it going to continue by accident or by random selection. We have to put our minds to it, our intentions to it. People say to me, what do you do about the ayatollahs of the world whose madness reaches into our bookstores? What do you do about the right to life and the white supremacists and the zealots who threaten our hospitals and our highways and our youth? What do you do about the political Philistines and their disciples who want to invade our schools and our play yards with their pieties? Many things. We take sides, we start arguments, and we stay awake. But first and foremost, we make a church like this church, as strong as we can make it. And we say to ourselves, what if this church were even stronger? What if this church were even bigger? What if there were more of them? What difference would that make? I'll tell you. Fanaticism works when there's no one to oppose it. Ignorance triumphs when there's too few to stand together to counter it. Prejudice and hate, baptized by a divine name, is abetted and sanctioned by a society where there's no institution strong enough to call it out by its proper name. Unity Temple, we live in morally ambiguous times. That's to say that there is no agreed upon morality today. And our nation is a house divided, and it's splitting even further as we speak. A house this divided cannot stand for too long. You, however, are called to live up to your name, to a mission of unity. So now that this building is restored, what the heck are you going to do about it? How are you going to use this building as a place worthy of its name? You sit in here each week facing each other. It's not just meant to draw you together. It's to give you and anyone who comes into this place an experience of what the world needs. You have the building, but do you have the courage to house a free and responsible conversation across many differences that will draw people to face each other in this land? The conversations that we're seeing on television and reading on Facebook are not very responsible most of the time. And we, Unitarian Universalists, can be just as guilty of turning away from those we disagree with. Now, in this house, you can't turn away. Do you dare do the same outside? In our Universalist theology, we say that we're all going to heaven. Now, whether you believe in heaven or not, stay with me on this for a minute. Don't get all literal on me, or you're going to miss the point. What does it mean that our church says that we are going to be in heaven with the swastika-waving neo-Nazis? The Confederate flag-waving white supremacists? The terrorists who run cars into crowds and planes into buildings? And how about the homophobes and the sex enslavers and the suicide bombers and the drug lords? We say that we will be in heaven one day with Kim Jong-un and the likes, just to name a few. Now, I don't think the way it works is that we get to heaven that we can't see, and then we let bygones be bygones. I think our theology is calling us to turn towards one another and to love one another here in this life that we can see. Albert Einstein said that no problem can be solved at the same level of consciousness that it was created. When we react and think in terms of us and them, we're attempting to solve the problem at the same level, and it won't work. We can't just try to be better than those who oppose us at their own game. We need to change the game, and we need to change the conversation. Fighting neo-Nazis and the KKK with weapons, as it happened in Charlottesville recently, is not going to solve the problem that caused these people to become fascists. It's just going to make it worse. They win if we get pulled into the polarization. If we demonize these 20-year-old American Nazis, a new generation, if we don't face them and try to understand what's driving them, then we're not unifying anybody. We need to learn to face each other in these United States and in Oak Park and in Chicago. What if we sat together looking into the faces of the white supremacists and the neo-Nazis? We might discover that we have a lot more in common than we like to admit. When we're forced to face each other, it becomes harder to turn away. Have you heard of Dayton Davis? He's a blues musician who's African American, and he's made it a mission to meet and talk with members of the KKK. It started some years ago in a bar. He was playing music, and after his set was over, he went and sat down at a table, and a white man walked over, sat down with him, seemed to really like his music. They started talking about the music, but it became clear quite quickly that even though this man was over 60 years old, he had never had a conversation with an African American before. Davis soon learned that the man was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. They agreed to meet again after that night, and eventually the man renounced the KKK and the white supremacist ideology. Now, we might think that this was an exception or a lucky happenstance, but since that day, Daryl Davis has single-handedly converted more than 200 Klansmen, including more than one Grand Wizard of the KKK. He does it by building relationships with them. He said, when two enemies are talking, they're not fighting. It's when the talking ceases that the ground becomes fertile for violence. If you spend 5 minutes with your enemy, your worst enemy, he says, it doesn't have to be about race. It could be about anything. You will find that you both have something in common. And you build upon those commonalities, and you're forming a relationship. And as you build a relationship, you're forming a friendship. That's what happened, Davis said. I didn't convert anybody. They saw the light and converted themselves. The world needs more Daryl Davises. It needs a temple worthy of the name unity. where the people don't just sit facing each other on Sundays, but where they teach the rest of us to do it every day. Are you up for that? I hope so, because we need you. Yeah? So I'm going to close with just a few specifics, because sometimes these sermons, they just, we just talk about all these big ideas, and it's kind of hard to know what to do with it. I heard this from Beth Zemsky, who's an intercultural consultant, who talked about this on her new podcast that she offers. Here's what love looks like. Here's what universalism looks like and demands. These three things. You might want to write them down. That everyone is included, that it's compassionate, especially to those most in need, and it reflects that my well-being is tied to your well-being. Look at it with healthcare. We want reforms that ensure everyone is included. We want to make sure that any reforms are compassionate to those in need, because we understand that our well-being is connected to everyone else's. Think about it with coal miners. Instead of telling them that coal is gone forever, deal with it. Frame the conversation with them explaining that we want an economy that includes everyone. And we want the economy to be compassionate to those who are hurting the worst. Because we realize that our well-being is tied to your well-being. It's unifying. It's universalist. It's based on core American values, based on Christian, Jewish, and Muslim values. If we want to help end the crimes against humanity, and that's what they are, that are happening disproportionately to people of color by our criminal justice system, instead of framing it as black lives versus blue lives, as so many are trying to do, let's be advocating and agitating for a system that works for everybody. A system that is compassionate for those who are most in jeopardy, because we know that all of our well-being is tied to each other's. We can't just wait and react and resist. We need to set the frame ourselves. Unity Temple, thank you for all you have done and all that you are doing to restore and maintain this building that is so beautiful to the eyes. Now, make sure you keep your eyes on what matters. Don't follow the birdie, or follow the tweet, or follow the words scrolling on the bottom of your television screen and get distracted from your purpose, your sacred purpose, a purpose that our world desperately needs. Remember, you want everyone included. You want compassion, especially to those who are most in need, and you know that your well-being is tied up in the well-being of everybody else. Preach it here, but also take it out there into the world. This world is hungry for what you're cooking up in this place. Use what you have here to sow some unity into this metropolis and into this divided nation. It's a time for this church to take its place even more boldly in the religious landscape of Chicago and of America. Because if unity was ever needed, it's needed now. You have the leadership, you have the history, you have each other, and you have a world-renowned building. It's time to take it to another level. God bless you. Amen.
Our hymn, our response to that extraordinary sermon, is called "There Is a Love Holding Us," written by Rebecca Parker, and our music director will lead us in it. She will sing it through. I invite you to stay seated.
There